Hi, everyone. Hey, welcome. Namaste. Namaste, my
Hello,
friends.
namaste.
Namaste, our friends. And I want to welcome Jenny Beal to as our guest this week. Welcome, Jenny.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, it's good to be with everyone. And it's good to have you back on the show again, Jenny. And we're on chapter 17. We're one chapter short of finishing. Let me just make sure I unmute my mic for the call-in feature. We're one chapter short of finishing. Wow, we've gone 17 chapters since October in the nature of consciousness. I just love this. This goes with me with the Course in Miracles. When I travel, this book and being aware, and the Course, those are my travel companions for for a plane ride, for my reading material, wherever I am, and it is a go-to for for just allowing the nourishment of the connection with the way Rupert presents the material in his books. All of them are fantastic. This one here has really been transformative for me for this book study. And even as early as yesterday and this morning, I'm rereading this chapter, and all of a sudden, I was telling Jenny before we came on the show, all of a sudden the light bulb came on in my mind. The light bulb came on for the full depth, the full introspection and integration of Rupert's metaphors. Even though I've heard him several times in retreats, talking about Jane and Mary and Jane and London and the streets of New York and all these other towns. It was only when I got to the end of this last chapter that he said something. I'm going to share it in a few minutes with you guys. I'm going to leave you on the edge of your seats of what he said, that the light bulb went off. But the light bulb totally went bright. And now I got it. I got the Jane and Mary metaphor. I feel like I, I can recite it actually. It's not just because I've been able to own it. So I just love this chapter that we're going to cover today. I love that it's Jenny that's sharing it with me. Thank you, Jenny, for being here. And I know I invited Jenny to be with us next week, you guys, but she'll be traveling. So we will have there'll be four of us. There'll be Kimberly, Annika, and Andrea will be doing chapter 18 together. And I know Annika said that she has to leave a little bit early, so we'll ask you to go first or pretty close to first. And before we get into this show, I just want to announce that originally we were going to this is going to be our next book, the art and practice. Oh no, the art of peace and happiness. And this is a 2 volume set. The next one is the intimacy of all experience. And this is a volume 1 and volume 2. Originally, we were going to start this next volume May 2nd, and I'm going to change that because I'm going to be walking the Camino with about 20 other beings in June. And I'll be about 2 weeks into it. If we start the book study of the next book in on May 2nd, I'll be in Spain, and I don't want to have my computer with me. I'm just going to have a backpack, and we're going to be walking for 120 miles. And so I won't be, but the new start date is going to be April 18th. And I'll send an email out to all of you that we're going to start that next book study April 18th. It will also have a registration link because it won't be connected with this registration at all. You'll have to make a new registration for that event. And it'll go April 18th to May 23rd. So it's not involved. It won't interrupt my schedule to do that 120-mile walk. So those are my couple of announcements, and now we can get into the chapter 17 with you, Jenny. And thank you everyone for being here with us. Really, real quick, I just want to look at the board and just say good morning to everyone. Thank you for being here with us. Um, Andrea says, I can get a connection to your video. I don't know what that means. Yes, but working now. Okay, is everyone getting this live video okay? Just got connected. Andrea says. Henrik says he's good. Donna Marie says good. Okay. So it looks like we're good to go. And I don't see any call-ins on the call-in feature. I hope I put the link up right. Sometimes I mess up. I got the link to go out correctly with who our guest host is today. Thank you very much. I'm happy when I don't make silly mistakes and I actually get the right guest on the right show date. So that worked out right. And Jenny, tell me what you think about this chapter 17.
Well, it's unusual because the whole of the chapter is devoted to that one metaphor of Mary and Jane, and it's the metaphor that Rupert has said really has the most explanatory power of all of his metaphors. And he is using it in so many different ways. I mean, normally on a retreat, he will be using just one aspect of that metaphor for each question. So he will be answering someone's confusion or question or concern with just one small aspect of the metaphor. But this time, because it's in a book and he's got a very wide audience, he is using it in almost every possible way. I think so. There's an awful lot to this chapter,
Mhm.
and sometimes people say, "Well, why do we need all of these words or all of these metaphors? Well, why don't we just be aware of being aware?" And that will give us everything. And it's true that if we have a deep understanding of our true nature, that's all that's necessary is just to abide as awareness. But for most people, there's a period of exploration and investigation which is needed before we get to that point. And the reason is that um, we all have different ways of viewing the world or thinking about ourselves, and they're in the world of science. They're called models, or in Advaita teaching, they're called superimposition, and Rupert often calls it colouring. So they're ideas that we superimpose on the world, and it's not possible to be without those models, and so they're fine in themselves. But what happens is that they become fixed beliefs, and we absolutely believe that the world is like that. And it's the purpose of these metaphors is just to provide us with a way, I think, of getting beyond those beliefs and seeing that perhaps there's another alternative. And the power of the metaphor, I think, is that it's unlike ordinary words or ordinary prose, which you can take very literally. You can't take a metaphor literally. So it has this tremendous power to take you beyond words, and I think that's really what's so important. Rupert calls all of his metaphors and all of his teaching a thorn to remove a thorn, which is something that comes from the Advaita
Mhm.
tradition. So the idea is that you're given an explanation which is a little better than the belief you currently hold, and temporarily, well, it removes that belief, replaces it with a different one. Ideally, not this time as a belief, and that's the idea, that you eventually throw both thorns away, because any belief is going to be is going to be wrong. Awareness is not describable. It's not something we can describe in words.
Mhm. Yeah.
So I think it's tremendously powerful. Um,
Mhm.
but obviously, not everyone needs all the explanation that's in each of the chapters in this book. And on the retreats, Rupert often says to people, if there's a question and an answer that doesn't really apply to you, you're not interested in, then just switch off. Just be aware of being aware, and
Mhm.
then when something that's more relevant to you occurs, then you can switch on again and listen
Mhm.
again.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important. There was I think someone made a mention on Facebook of an awful lot of intellectualizing and complication, and it's of necessity that is what's in this book. But you just need the bits that you need, and some people need very little explanation, and others want to go into everything in painful detail, as I did, and as Rupert did too.
Yeah.
But this is, I mean, this is it's such an amazing metaphor, and if you want to really summarize the chapter, it's life is a dream. It's so close to that actual indescribable experience, and once we really know and understand and feel that life is a dream, it changes everything. I can remember lying in bed one morning, and that that thought just came to me, and I just lay there contemplating it, and it was absolutely mind blowing.
Mm.
It was an incredible thing to realize, and in a way, that's all anyone needs to get out of this chapter in some respect. But there's an awful lot more than that in here, of course.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Uh, excuse me. This chapter came alive for me in a whole new way after the third time of reading it. And first, I would just read it. Excuse me. Excuse me. First, I was just reading it and trying to figure out where where does Jane fit in? How does Mary fit in? And when I read it this last time to get ready for this talk, all of a sudden, when I read like on page 174, the second paragraph, when Rupert talks about when Jane says, I see the bowl of fruit, she refers to the eye that sees or knows. And she thinks this I belongs to and resides in her body. But the I in Peter, the I in Claire, and the I in John, the knowing with which each of them knows their experience is the same. And that kind of went, that's the collective viewing that is all connected to the same consciousness. It's none of us different. And the I, the same I, belongs to each one and not separate from each one. And the same I belongs to all 8 billion. And plus all the same I that belongs to an insect or an animal, the same.
It's amazing, isn't it? He says that Jane is a process and not a separate entity, and that was a statement I really liked. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a big one. And then the other thing that I really had as an aha, I had so many ahas on this chapter. The other aha that I have, because I come from the Course in Miracles tradition, and also I was a follower of Jesus when I was in the Christian tradition, and the Christ, I used to think Jesus was the Christ, and I then realized that we're all the Christ. And the metaphor in this chapter is referring to Mary as the Christ mind, as Christ consciousness. And that really fits well for me, is realizing that it's just talking about Christ consciousness, which is just really the way of it's consciousness. It's the same that Rupert refers to here as consciousness or awareness or knowing. It's all the same.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That's very helpful for me. There is only one. I love on the next page where he talks about there is only one reality, Mary's mind, and all the apparent things are modulations of that, which means that whatever story you have, whatever story someone else has, whatever story I have, they're all coming from the modulation or from the refracted or from the finite filter of Mary's mind. They're all coming from the same, they're all part of and as a result of, but they are not the ultimate primary state of consciousness. They're just a a limit of that same consciousness. So that's in that way, it can't be separate from the whole. It can't be separate from consciousness itself.
Yes, and I think is it on page 169? He says, "All Mary ever knows, even in the form of Jane's mind, is her own indivisible mind." And then a bit later on, he says, Each of our minds is a dream in the infinite mind of consciousness. And as such, each of our minds is the agency through which consciousness realizes a segment of its infinite potential." And
Yes,
it's that idea of agency is one he uses a lot. For Mary to know the world, then she has to overlook her own infinite nature and dream the world into existence.
yes,
It's such a beautiful concept, isn't it?
yes.
Yes.
And in doing that, Mary has to forget what she is. In doing that, Mary must forget what she is in order to not experience her true nature.
Yes. And the way this metaphor explains how the separate self or the ego develops, I think is absolutely wonderful. I'll read just a paragraph because I think it's really great.
Okay, thanks.
Based on the evidence of her senses, Jane thinks the knowing or the consciousness with which I know the world lives in my brain. And she notices that when she closes her eyes, the streets of London disappear, and when she opens them, they reappear, and she reasonably concludes that whatever it is that is seeing the streets of London must be located just behind her eyes. And then he goes on the same with hearing. And he says, collating the information from her senses in this way, Jane concludes that her mind is located in her head. And you can see how obvious that is. And it's interesting that there's no moralizing about this. It's not sin, or it's not evil. It's just a natural and logical conclusion, even though it's not actually right. And we saw in chapter 4, I think it was, the way an infant develops and how it's necessary for them to develop this feeling of being separate, and then they go on, their development goes on, hopefully, to come back to where we are now on the direct path.
Yeah.
And that's really good. I mean, it's a lovely explanation that we haven't done anything wrong.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I like the way you put that, Jenny, and I like the to I like to bring a new understanding, a new way of seeing the experience of what used to be regarded as something bad, and in fact, the word sin has a it has an old kind of a residue of being like you're not good. If
Yes.
you're a damn sinner.
Mm.
And I like bringing in examples that really just speak of these gentle experiences of consciousness actually experiencing itself, and that's all there is. That's all that's all the Bible was ever pointing to, even though it was completely misunderstood. I mean, almost 100. I don't know of an accurate percentage, but it's a pretty high percentage that it was not understood, not interpreted correctly, and it was always, as far as I can understand, it was always interpreted, even from the beginning, by Abraham and Moses as a god outside of themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
So the thing that really got me, besides Mary's mind, is Christ consciousness. Is and the bowl of fruit where all of the eyes are the same eye. I love that.
Mhm.
As a teacher, and as a teacher of A Course in Miracles, and as a teacher of just these ideas, and I don't in any way feel that I'm at the level or caliber of Rupert Spira. Uh, Yet. I don't think there's a limit for any of us. And I don't think that, and I don't put Rupert on a pedestal. I regard him um, with just a high integrity of, of passion, compassion, clarity, articulation, the way he is able to bring what I think are pretty complex ideas, and he's able to express them uh, simple simple enough for me to understand it and be able to share it with others. And this experience that Rupert offers in all of his books, everything that I've read from Rupert and from each of the retreats, has helped me to actually be a better teacher of A Course in Miracles, because it really has helped me to understand more of the depth and the dialogue that's happening in that tradition as well. But it goes further than that in helping me to, with other teachers of spirituality in different ways, whether it's Kundalini yoga, whether it's something that's from the tradition of Great Freedom or Buddhism, we're all learning how to speak on a more level and a more common playing field. And that's really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in being able to dialogue with others that are wherever I go, and really, for me, that there's a common place where I'm able to appreciate and love and support, and then also dialogue with others in their own tradition without making it mine better, theirs worse, without making it separate. But really, when I see all of these eyes, the way Rupert speaks in this chapter, I'm able to take everybody's eye and put it in the bowl.
Yes. Yes. I loved the idea of the bowl of fruit and everyone seeing the the same fruit, the same bowl.
Mhm.
And of course, the materialists say, well, that's because there's an actual physical bowl out there made of solid matter, and there's another as another explanation that all everything has been downloaded from that one consciousness from Mary's mind,
Yes.
and it's so simple and so obvious as well.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. I remember having quite a number of long conversations with him about this, and it was finally when he introduced that idea from with Mary and Jane that I got it.
Nice, nice.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna be on his webinar tomorrow. I'm gonna ask him, I have a question for him, and I'm looking forward to seeing him and seeing everyone that's gonna be on that broadcast. And, uh, in my mind, these metaphors are the bridge to help to bring understanding to someone else that may not really that may not see it just from just a literal sense or and I the way he talks in this chapter he describes two paths. There's a path of love or devotion, and then the path of knowledge. And in my mind, it seems like the path of knowledge is awareness, is the understanding of awareness and the understanding of of what that means. And then the path of love is the experience that's not using words to to connect with or understand the identity of our true nature, but it's using the experience of love as we know it, or devotion to this indescribable experience that we don't know how to describe would also be maybe an understanding of the path of love. So when I'm looking at those two, what he calls the two types of paths to the same place, I can see why I understand it easily this way. Awareness was an easy thing for me to understand right away when when it was first offered to me. And other people that I speak of I think that are more advanced than I am in spiritual content, they really don't get the path of knowledge or the path of awareness, but they do get the path and the understanding of love. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, yes, I do. In the Hindu tradition, the path of knowledge is called jnana, and if it's followed in its very pure form, it can become very dry and full of just logical arguments, and really get quite tedious and boring. And the path of devotion is called bhakti, also path of love. And one of the difficulties that Rupert explains on the path of love is that it's very, very hard for people to give up the object of devotion. There will always be some object of devotion on the path of love. It can be a very subtle object. It can be a teacher or a teaching, or it can just be a general idea of what consciousness is. But it's actually giving up that object of devotion is very, very hard. And what Rupert does, because he and I too came from a tradition where you um, you have a more balanced approach, which is head and heart together. And some people need a bit more head, and some people need a bit more heart. But generally, you don't neglect one at the expense of the other. And I think he's absolutely brilliant at at bringing those two together.
Mhm.
When I first started going to his meetings, I was very much on the path of head rather than the path of heart. and it just naturally over time I moved across because there were things that I needed because it had become dry and too dry and logical,
Mhm.
and it wasn't anything that I tried to do. It was just something that happens very naturally.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
But
and it
I think if people don't understand something, if they really don't get consciousness, often there will be a belief at the back of it, which needs to be exposed. And Rupert is so good at finding out what that belief is, whether the person's comes from a Bhakti tradition or from a Jnana tradition.
Mhm.
He's really good at sussing that out,
Mhm.
um, and it's not always it's not always obvious. I mean, this book is very much about the beliefs that scientists hold, but you could write, or Rupert could, at least could write, a similar book about the beliefs that Christians or Sufis or Buddhists hold, um, because any religion tends to, as you said earlier, tends to deteriorate into a set of beliefs rather than taking you beyond all belief to pure consciousness.
Mhm. Yeah. And it was, when you talk about devotion, and when Rupert talks about devotion, and you expand on that as you did in the path of love, it makes me think of Muji. It makes me think of the guru that initially you are attracted to his embodiment of the of the of the pointing. And then eventually you have to let go of him being the embodiment. You have to realize that he's pointing you to you, and I think that's hard for people to let go. That's hard for devotees to say, okay, Muji's not different or separate from me. He's pointing me to what we all have in common. And
Exactly.
and that's where I feel that it takes a devoted guru to not just not that's devoted to the path or to the pointing, to not hold his devotees in himself in some kind of higher regard. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and there are two really lovely YouTube videos called "The Responsibility of a Teacher" from Rupert. There's part one and part two. I don't know whether you've heard those, but they are wonderful because they explain how, as you say, it's almost automatic that people do become devoted to their teacher,
Hmm.
but the teacher mustn't allow that to happen. Allow it for a little while, but then very quickly get down from the pedestal, in other words.
Well, it's funny. I know Muji very well. I've lived with him for months, and I've been to the ashram many times, and a lot of his devotees are really good friends of mine, and I find that Muji is pushing. He's kind of got himself in a twixt of a situation, because he really does enjoy the guru part, but he also wants to make sure that he's pointing the beings to the experience and not to himself. So
Yes,
and that whole establishment of the guru is sort of like, okay, you have it, but you don't. You want it, but you don't want it at the same time. There's something that's primary, that is to point. The pointing to the devotees is not to me, but what you see in me is what you also are. And I see that Muji actually he does that. It's mostly his devotees, the ones that are closest to him, that keep him appearing to be on a pedestal, or to be appearing to be higher. And I always see him like he came when I was there the last time. He sat down next to me and had lunch with me. And yeah, I don't hold him special. I love him, and I hold him in regard like I do Rupert or like I do other great teachers, but I don't feel the experience of like they're so much better than I am, or they know something that I don't have access to, because that's I just don't let that in. And because of that, I feel that he feels very comfortable sitting down next to people that aren't idolizing him.
Yes, I can absolutely imagine that. Rupert has said once that part of the purpose of a retreat is that you're living together with your teacher, and you're seeing that he is just an ordinary human being, and you have breakfast together, and you chat together over lunch or evening meal, and it's it is just like talking to a friend, and eventually, as you know, he becomes a friend. And
Well, this is funny. This is a little. This is, you guys are going to laugh at this. You know, I went to the Mercy Center retreat to see Rupert about 2 years ago. And the thing that stuck in my head, believe it or not, was when I went to the bathroom and I'm standing there waiting for Rupert to get finished with the urinal so I could use it. And I'm thinking, and he goes over and washes his hands just like me. And I'm going, wow, this is just a normal guy. He uses the bathroom just like me. So he says hello, and he's just very just normal. And then we go into the lunchroom or the place for dinner or lunch, whatever we're doing, and he just sits down at different tables. He doesn't give himself off as being somehow special, or and he doesn't want to be regarded in that way. And when he would walk out of the satsang, out of the I call it a satsang, as he would walk out of the meeting, he had his shoes off. He just walked by everybody. We didn't have to wait for him to pass and give our namaste and wait for him to leave the room before we could leave. It was just like, okay, Rupert goes out and walks out with us. It was just really very nice.
yes,
Yeah, that was great. But
mm,
that stuck in my head. I'm going, oh wow, he's
I
going
can imagine. Yes.
guy. Yeah, it was fun.
Mm, mm,
I really look forward to going back out to Mercy Center in California. I'm looking for a window so I can attend another retreat out there. I had such a good time with those guys out there. It was such a good
yes.
experience for me. And if you guys that are watching have not been to one of his retreats in the US either, I mean, I'd love to go to one in London or somewhere in Europe, but in the US, Mercy Center in California is a great retreat center that it's actually one I think is I like. It's my favorite because there's more of a community living space to hang out uh, in between the meetings, and then also the one in Garrison in near New York is really a great experience. Both of those. If you don't
Um,
have a
uh, and
pardon,
Buckland Hall is lovely in Wales.
what is?
It's Buckland Hall is beautiful in Wales. If you're for all the Europeans that are listening,
Okay,
it's a lovely place to stay. Beautiful countryside, lovely warm log fires to sit beside and
nice.
chat. It's very nice.
Yeah, I guess wherever you bring that community of purpose, or the community of interest and inspiration, and going deeper in the investigation of the experience of the self, of the being, of the nature of consciousness,
Mhm.
you're going to find probably the same kind of experience.
I,
Yeah,
I think so. I think there's it's a very beautiful community. Of course, we have people from the US who come to the UK as well. So it's not two separate communities really.
yeah,
There's some sharing,
sure.
which is nice.
Yeah. Well, maybe
Um,
one day I'll get to come out there. Lisa, my wife Lisa, is on her way to Florida with her mother right now, and so I'm going to be a bachelor for about 5 days. I'm looking forward to some time alone, and also I'm looking forward for her to be able to spend some time down in Florida. But to get back to this chapter,
yes.
you know, the one thing I was really couldn't wait to get to when I got into like two-thirds of this chapter was okay, so when does when does Jane wake up or when does Mary wake up and how does that play out in the description of this chapter from Rupert?
Yes, yes. There's it was something that was really I suppose a kind of remaining problem for me because I felt that well when Jane wakes up then or rather when Mary wakes up, really Jane goes to sleep then, and there is just Mary's mind which um, has no objective qualities. So is it really true that it's only when we are without any kind of objective experience that we are truly being aware of being aware? But it never seemed like that, and I I asked Rupert about it, and he again used this metaphor, and he explained, no, it's nothing really changes. Mary is just lucid dreaming. There's nothing that changes. I'll read you a little bit because it was. I think it describes it so beautifully. The way I experience doesn't change at all. It's just how we see it changes.
Okay.
It's clear to us that the self that we essentially are belongs not to this body, but to infinite consciousness. It doesn't imply that we stop experiencing the world and others from the perspective of the body. Consciousness continues to take the form of a body and appear as a finite mind. Mary continues to dream she is Jane, but now she's lucid dreaming. She sees and knows everything as herself. Likewise, once the finite mind has recognized that the knowing with which it knows its experience belongs to infinite consciousness, this recognition profoundly conditions the way we relate to experience. And that explained everything to me, and it was something that was quite hard for me to grasp because the tradition I came from was very much a tradition of meditation. Well, one half of it was the tradition of meditation, and that's very much about going into nirvikalpa samadhi, which is consciousness without any objects. And it was it was a belief that I had that real consciousness can have no objects. There can't be consciousness with objects. But
Yeah.
to discover that yes, actually, all the objects can appear just as they always have, but you interpret them differently. You don't believe all of the models that you superimpose on them. You can use the models from science, or you can use the models from art or from cooking or whatever it is, but you don't believe that they're real. You
Yeah.
see it and you feel it as a dream, and then you feel everyone you meet, everything you touch, um, all of it is myself, and it begins to feel like that. There's a kind of flip that happens in the mind after you've had all of your questions and doubts answered, and the one of the rules I always kept to for myself. Rupert says there should never be any rules, but I have one rule for myself, and that was whenever I was in a meeting with him and I was asking a question, I would never let go of the microphone until I was utterly satisfied, completely satisfied, and really understood. And that was so. I'll pass that on to everyone here because it's a really useful. It works in webinars as well.
Yeah.
It's a very useful rule. But once you've had all of your questions answered, nothing arises again, and then you're just quite naturally you're spending more time just abiding as awareness, and after a time that flip occurs, and
Mm,
so the world no longer jumps out as being a world, a solid world. It's um, your natural baseline is um, is the dream, and that everything is myself,
mhm.
and
Yeah.
that's very beautiful,
Mhm.
and that's the process.
Yeah. And it's also becomes the experience, as I can say for myself, that it is possible to to live in the experience of awareness while the activities of life are occurring, and allow the presence of awareness to overshadow, or to be known as as identified as your true nature, while these other experiences that may be pulling towards emotions, that maybe have family member experiences or financial or health, any of these experiences are able to be seen and not made or given unnecessary attention to. And while you do that, as this, and I, this is what I wanted to say at the beginning of this show, the lucid dreamer. Now I get it. Now, when I saw Rupert's explanation of Mary continues to dream, she is Jane, but now she is lucid dreaming. All of a sudden, bing, the other light bulb,
Mm.
the light bulb went on. And I'm going, oh, yeah, lucid dreaming. I've done that. I've done the lucid dreaming where the dream was so real that I knew that I was dreaming, but I was awake at the same time. I had that happen to me several times. In fact, I caused myself before going into a sleep state when I was practicing the lucid dreaming experience years ago. I actually could cause myself to lucid dream and have this crazy experience of like flying and being in Star Wars experiences and all this kind of crazy stuff, and then and going, wow, I was awake for that, and then to see how Rupert really describes the same thing, and that's this right here. That's that's lucid dreaming, and as you just said, we can flip. We shift, or we move over into the knowing of the experience of awareness as it's known, and we arise into the certainty and the confidence and the clarity of that knowing of the presence of I, or the presence of consciousness as us. Life can keep happening, but it gets a whole lot easier.
Yes, there's no resistance to it. That's really why it gets easier, I think, doesn't it?
Yes, yes,
Mm.
yes. But I totally loved when I saw him say that lucid dreaming thing. I went, oh yeah,
Yes.
that's it, right there. And then I underlined underneath that where he talks about the moon's light. He says it's not Jane, because I wanted Jane. I wanted to see how Jane woke up. I wanted to, you know what I'm saying? I wanted to see
Yes.
how does Jane wake up in this story.
Well, you see, Jane doesn't really exist. Jane is just is just an activity of Mary's mind, or just a dream in Mary's mind. So she's not. only an entity can really wake up, I suppose.
Well,
But what does happen in the story is that she has a friend called Claire, um, who comes and really takes her through a process of self inquiry, and she through that process she realizes her true nature,
yeah,
and that's when Mary starts lucid dreaming.
yes, yeah.
Yes.
So, but
It's Mary
Claire,
that wakes in a way. Yes.
but the Claire is having a conversation with Jane, and
Yes.
Jane's mind, the mind of Mary's mind, actually, that
And so's Claire's mind, of course.
right,
They're both Mary's mind,
yes,
and in a way, probably part of the reason that Claire is able to get through so nicely to Jane is because their two minds are interconnected in that way. They've been downloaded from the same source.
yes, yes. It's got a great ending. That's all
It's
I
got a lovely ending.
great ending. I'm going to look at a couple of comments on the chat board for you guys. Thank you for staying with us, all of you. And David Spector says Jacqueline was having trouble with freezing up. And Andrea, I forgot to mention, Andrea is going on that walk with me in Spain, in Portugal and Spain. The what do we call it? The Santiago something. What is it?
Santiago de Compostela.
Yeah,
Yes.
we're only doing 120 miles of it, but Andrea, right here with us, is going to be on that walk with us. And Andrea says, only consciousness is conscious. That is oneness. Nothing else in conscious. Everything appears in, is known by, and made out of one consciousness. So beautiful. Yep. Thank you very much, Andrea. And David says, I actively follow both Rupert and Muji because I enjoy the path of knowledge, Rupert, as well as the path of the heart, Muji.
Well, Rupert is definitely both. If you
Yeah.
want someone who is pure jnana, then Greg Good is an example of that. But Rupert is definitely both.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to that Rupert so clearly helps to point you from knowing back to he says you go in, you go out. You once you discover the in, then you go back out and you integrate, and that's where I think he does both.
Yes.
He really helps. He helps me to not just be awareness, but realize that there's nothing outside of what awareness is. Everything's included, and that's why bringing it all in and allowing it to marinate into my experience as the lucid dreamer, it just makes life much more enjoyable and much more tolerable. Also, makes it fun.
Yes.
Andrea says the best teachers are those who have let their separated ego self dissolve. Yes, we are all equal, sharing our uniqueness. And
Mm.
David says consciousness without objects is the fourth state of consciousness. Consciousness, along with the first three states of consciousness, is the fifth state. Nah,
No,
I don't know about
that's
all.
a traditional path, a traditional Hindu
Yeah,
path. I do recognize that. But actually, even the Shankaracharya said in one of his final talks with Francis Rolls that there are no states of consciousness, which is exactly what Rupert says.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think when you start getting into the states of consciousness, it starts adding multiplicity onto the onto just consciousness and I think that's a little bit of a distraction. I think it can be another tradition in the making, and that's what I love about the simplicity of awareness. Awareness is so simple, it's almost like, really, is it that easy? Is it that? Can it be that clear and that easy that awareness is it?
I think that, I mean, that's one of the most common beliefs that I've come across, is that it's very difficult and I can't get there. And I've heard people say that so often. And it is just a belief. It's it's possible for everyone, as Rupert says. He doesn't have anything that all of the rest of us don't have
Right.
equally.
Right. And equally the comment, oh yeah, the Camino. Thank you, Geert. The comment that David makes is it's a path. It's a pathway to the experience of the ultimate consciousness, which is the only state there is. It's only consciousness can't be multiplied in more than one. Otherwise, you're still dreaming, right?
Yeah, it's indivisible, and it has no objective qualities, so it would be impossible to distinguish one state from another. So just through um, pure jnana from Advaita Vedanta, it can't be so.
Yes. Well, two of my favorite things that I guess they're not my favorite, but two highlights of this chapter, because the favorite that I have is is what I mentioned in the lucid dreaming, and then the that that I really did get who Mary is and how Mary is the Christ and how I fit into to being Jane, all of that. But the other two highlights I had from this chapter is in the last two paragraphs that Maya remains, but ignorance goes. I love that because the activity of life remains, the illusion remains, but the ignorance of what I am goes. I like that description. And then I really like this part where he talks about in the Christian tradition, this is known as the transfiguration. That makes it accessible. That makes it available. It's not just for Jesus and Moses and Joseph and this hierarchy of beings that are described in ancient writings, but it makes it available to everyone. No one's excluded.
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite kind of a capstone on this chapter, Jenny?
I suppose one thing, I mean, everything, the whole idea is my favorite, the whole metaphor. But one thing we haven't mentioned, which I think is important, is where Mary meets Peter. Well, I think she's in love with Peter, and the love that we feel for other people is the hint of our true nature, our common nature, that there is only one I, and I think that's very beautiful.
Mm,
And whenever we whenever we go and meet anyone, even people we don't know, people in the supermarket, um, there's a feeling of love, and you recognize that feeling of love as coming from our shared being, and that's wonderful,
yes,
and
yes,
that's happiness.
yes. He does a really nice job with this chapter. I am thrilled that it's such a great chapter, and I think it's a very important chapter. Really, it's important for me because it really does connect the dots in some of the most important dialogue in Rupert's retreats. Is the understanding of the Mary and the Jane story and really having a clear understanding of it. And I get this from this chapter. It's really great. And the other thing is, I found in this chapter where Annika got her image for the picture of her doorway, the portal of the eye comes from this chapter. And that's if you've seen that image that or that drawing that Annika has made where she has a doorway and and like I on one side of it and I am on the other side, and it's the portal where we go back and forth into and out of the from the consciousness to the dream state. It's really great.
Yes. Mm.
Yeah. Well, we're at the top of our hour, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this week's book club, chapter 17, with Jenny Beal. And thank you, Jenny, for being our guest host and such a knowledgeable participant in our guest hosts. I just really appreciate where that you're able to add so much flavor, so much insight, and so much really of Rupert's his authentic teaching to our book study group. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Bill. It's been lovely to be with everyone. Namaste.
And I'll see everyone next week for chapter 18 with our other guests, hosts. All four of us will be here. As I said, Jenny will be traveling, and we'll see you guys next week. I love you all. Bye bye.